Look, thank you all for coming today to our session on KiwiSaver law reform. I'm Penny Sheerin, I'm a partner at Chapman, Tripp, and I specialise in financial services law, including KiwiSaver. In this session, we're going to discuss the ins and outs of KiwiSaver law reform, what should be included in future reform and why. And first, I'd like to introduce you to all of our panellists. Anna Scott, at the end here, CEO of Smartshares at NZX. Anna joined NZX in September 2023 as the CEO of Smartshares. Before joining NZX, Anna held management roles in New Zealand and London at Hobson Wealth and JP Morgan, as well as New Zealand directorships in financial services firms. We've also got Nigel Jackson sitting next to Anna, who's CEO of BT Funds Management. Nigel has over 25 years' experience in financial services and funds management and has held leadership roles at Westpac New Zealand, OnePath New Zealand, ANZ Funds Management and State Street New Zealand. Nigel is currently co-chair of the FSC Investment in KiwiSaver CEO Forum and is an FSC board member. Next to Nigel, we've got Sonya Williams, co-founder, director and 3EO, which is co-CEO of Sharesies. It's the first time I've heard that term, Sonya. It's a great one. So Sonya has built a career in technology and global marketing and product management, and she's passionate about using technology to solve big problems and create a more equitable society. She was co-winner of the 2020 Women of Influence Business Award alongside Sharesies co-founder Brooke Roberts and the 2022 New Zealand Services Entrepreneur of the Year alongside co-CEOs Brooke and Leighton. And finally, we've got Harry from Guardian Trust, who gave me a pass on pronouncing his last name, but I'll give it a try, Koprivcic. Harry joined Guardian Trust in 2005 and has a strong background in financial analysis. He specialises in funds management, superannuation, including KiwiSaver, debt securities, structured finance and non-bank deposit takers. So thank you all in advance for the valuable insights I know you'll be sharing with us all today. So let's turn to the nature of a review of KiwiSaver. Do we need a full-scale review, or would some tweaking, just fixing certain aspects, be enough? Is it better that we have some quick wins in the short term, or would it be better to wait for the longer term and have a more comprehensive review but have the obvious delays? Harry, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that given the growth of the KiwiSaver and that the last evaluation of the policy settings was longer than a decade ago now and should have happened every 7 years, it's a timely to have a review of KiwiSaver to ensure that it's achieving its purpose and that New Zealanders have appropriate level of savings for their retirement. I think it's important that review applies a long-term thinking, and it's supported by all political parties, and to ensure that settings are fit for purpose over a longer period of time. So I think full review would be beneficial to have a look at that. But hearing some comments this morning and priorities of the governments, I think would take any quick wins, and particularly when it comes to contributions, because if we have to wait for a long time, we're going to be losing, right? Yep. And we all know and we all agree that contribution settings and ensuring that members have sufficient appropriate level of retirement savings, it's important. I think I would take any quick wins, and particularly when it comes to contributions now as well.
And Anna, what are your thoughts on a full review or a partial review?
I agree with Harry around you want to balance the kind of the get stuff done and the traction early on with the perfection. And I don't think any of us think we've got time to wait around for the perfection. But then it comes into the cycle of how often do you review and whether we get that commitment back to do that every 7 years. And one of the things talking to Jane at the Retirement Commission this morning is they do a review every 3 years of retirement income policies, and one is due next year. So part of what they're suggesting and recommending is that the theme of that review is KiwiSaver this time. So I think that if the government agrees to that and that gets tabled in December, then actually what we've got is a really good set of data that's going to be gathered from a broad perspective, so that we can build on that. And I think we should take that opportunity to build as a community and then get some of those plans laid out which allow us to have both some quick wins and some longer term plans.
Great, yeah. So let's now focus on some of the particular aspects of KiwiSaver that could be reformed. And Harry, you mentioned contributions there. That's a topic that's often discussed. And in fact, I think some of you may have attended a 2-hour masterclass on that topic yesterday. So look, we won't dwell on it too much here. But obviously, it is an important point, and it seems widely recognised that New Zealanders are simply not saving enough for their retirement. Nigel, how do you think we go about shifting the dial here, and how do we drive increased contributions by New Zealanders?
Thanks, Penny. Look, it's a great question, and it's a challenge that's been talked about a lot already over the last couple of days. I mean, I think the settings clearly need to be changed. There's, at the moment, there's a clear retirement gap. People aren't saving enough to have a dignified retirement, and the way to address that is by increasing the level that we are saving. But people won't do that, unless the settings encourage and enable that. There are many ways that could be achieved, or there are a couple of ways that could be achieved. It could be employee-led, it could be employer-led. There's tax incentives, there's compulsion. All of those elements play into that, opportunity, for want of a better word. Personally, I think employers increasing the employer contributions has real merit. I think, given low income levels in New Zealand, I think that's potentially a path of least resistance to making that change, and by getting political momentum behind it eventually too. I think the other change there that you'd make in terms of contributions, which has been talked about as well, is decoupling employee and employer contributions as well. So I think the key element though is any change needs to be clearly signalled in advance and phased in gradually to give people time to plan and adapt.
Yeah. And Sonya, what do you think about this point?
Yeah, I think, we definitely see KiwiSaver as such a fundamental tool to helping people grow that long-term wealth and close the retirement gap, which I think, no one here is disagreeing that we have one. And so much about its design around growing great financial behaviours, like it really does focus on building your wealth, your long-term wealth, one payday at a time. And it really shows the power of how that can build. And so how lifting contributions plays a part of that is really this issue with apathy and how much of that is a real cultural change, and how more material amounts going into your KiwiSaver can drive more engagement. We see this with research that we've done in Australia that shows, because we do operate over there as well, that shows that an Australian audience has more engagement with their super, and their contribution rates are far higher than ours. And yes, they built that up over time. So I think definitely gradually is a message as well, that not expecting any change to happen overnight like that we do need to build there for people, especially understanding at the moment there's so much pressure in households and in businesses that, but this is a really long-term problem, and the designs and the changes that we put in place now really do set people up for the long term. One other thing around how the contributions and what that signals is, it's really common for the mindset around that to be, I have KiwiSaver, therefore I'm sorted for my retirement. So at the current rate of 3%, we know that that's not going to get you there. So what that's driven is, as far as that kind of cultural understanding with people, is I have this, I'm sorted. And the analogy I think of with that is it's like training for a marathon on a training plan that's never going to get you across the line. You show up and you feel like you've done the training, but you're not quite there. So I think how do we make sure what we do have in place is eyes wide open for people about what they need to bring to the table to be set up well for their retirement, and that more engagement can really lift financial literacy, and that's a big part of this as well. People really do learn by doing, and you can sit and teach, but I think having skin in the game and being involved in it just lifts that financial literacy over time. That's why I think about the contributions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sonya. I'm going to stick with you for a little bit. I've got a couple of questions for you. You mentioned the gap. So we know that some people are getting left behind in KiwiSaver, and the gap between those that have wealth and those that don't is growing. There's also gender and ethnicity aspects to the retirement savings gap. How do you think we should address the gap?
Yeah, and I think there was some, the most recent research from Te Ara Ahunga Ora, the Retirement Commission, highlighted that there's a 36% gap between what men and women are putting into KiwiSaver each year, and that the financial discomfort is felt more in Māori and Pacifica and women responses to those surveys. But it also showed that there's a real interest in getting involved and planning for your retirement from those groups, and buying property and really setting yourself up for the long term. So when we talk about increasing engagement, and you say like, why are people left out or things like that, the first thing would be like engage with those groups meaningfully. I think it's okay to come, with solutions, but it's really understanding what's in the way. So I would get alongside people and really understand and get that lived experience. The other way is shifting to make it compulsory, especially when people turn 18. I think the number of times we've been told that, and I was in this boat, and I know when you sign up, you get your first job and all the paperwork comes through and you're signing it and it says, this KiwiSaver form came in, or this is what it was for me. And you're like, oh, so what is this? And they say, oh, so this is going to get deducted from your pay. And you're like, a deduction from my pay? And I was about to say no, and then one of my colleagues pulled me aside and was like, this is pretty much free money, like sign the line. And so I think there's that thing around when you make it compulsory, you're role modelling, like there's so many people out there who didn't have the colleague that pulled them aside, who aren't in the family that are talking about money or KiwiSaver, or could say, this is actually really important for you, although that we are struggling right now with money, this is a really important system, for you to be a part of. And so like it being compulsory just means that everyone is in the mix about that KiwiSaver, and it's not kind of just for the people who already see the value in it. The employer contributions, you talked about that. But as well, just looking at those areas of policy where people are left behind. There's ones around, and it's in the design, and so much can be designed, on purpose, but there's also things that are designed by accident that have real impacts for people. So things like if you're a single parent, needing to have two parents to sign to get a KiwiSaver for a child, that's one example, but there's so many, so it's looking at to those areas where that's having real impact and creating barriers for people.
Yeah. You also mentioned financial education and literacy, which I think we all agree is really important, and it's another way we can help close the retirement savings gap. Can you tell us a bit about what Sharesies is doing around financial literacy?
Yeah, and I think I'm getting all the questions at the moment. So one is around normalising the conversation and reducing the stereotype. You hear a lot about financial literacy, or that Kiwis are bad at saving and investing and all that. And that was really, when we started Sharesies, that was one of the ones that we were looking to counter, is actually people aren't inherently bad or good at things, that there are ways that you can design things to engage. And we've definitely seen that through by removing barriers to people getting involved in something, and by people actually learning through doing, that does build engagement. And leads to better outcomes for people. They know more. You don't have to know it all on day one, but you do build it up over time just from being involved. There's as well, that engagement piece, but also recognising that there's ways that you can, communicate with your audience once they are really engaged. And we know that KiwiSaver has a real apathy problem. And so finding out, we really find out what our investors want from us, what our KiwiSaver members want from us, and work out how to kind of build that into the experience. And an example is, we all know that markets go up and down, and there's been turbulent times. But the advice, that you can give is, how do you prepare your members for that? So that way when it happens, it's not a panic, hey, this is happening, and kind of just informing, but it is really saying, how do you ready your members so that way when it does happen, they check back in with themselves, does this align with my strategy? They're not making kind of those decisions at the time. So we try to bring in as much of good habits and good practice, and make that as part of the experience.
Great, thank you. Anna, to turn to you, I'd like to talk about broadening the eligibility to participate in KiwiSaver now. There's obviously currently restrictions on who's eligible to participate in KiwiSaver and who can receive incentives such as the employer and government contributions. What are your thoughts on broadening eligibility to participate?
Well, I think one of it's a bit in the name, right? So it's called the KiwiSaver because it's meant to be for Kiwis, who by definition are New Zealanders. So I think if we look about who is living and working in this country, we shouldn't have restrictions on that. And one, like Sonya's, when you first started, but a lot of our people start a job when they're under 18. And to opt out or to not have them included at that point just means we lose that opportunity for it to become personal about their situation and for them to be engaged at that younger age. So I think that we really do need to think about how those settings broaden out. It shouldn't exclude people based on their age bracket, whether they're too young or too old. It shouldn't exclude people based on their living status here if they've got a job and they're working and they're contributing. Other countries have figured out what that means if you leave the country and how you take your pension or you don't. So I think we really need to, if we're going to get true engagement, to make it personally available and personally relevant to everybody who's here.
And another idea that's been discussed a bit is spreading savings across multiple providers. I know the National Party has indicated a desire to increase flexibility and choice for KiwiSaver members by allowing them to allocate their savings across multiple providers, and saying this will encourage innovation, competition, choice, and improve returns over investors' lifetimes. Harry, what do you think about the idea of allowing KiwiSaver savings to be spread across multiple KiwiSaver providers?
Yeah, the standard many other jurisdictions provide for this. However, I believe this is not necessary. I think it will add many complexities that will be challenging for both providers and members. Somewhat, it's already available to members through investment platforms as well, and providers and managers already provide multiple fund options that have exposure to different asset classes. I think operationally it would be challenging, looking at administering, splitting contributions, withdrawals, claiming government contributions, or anything like that, and ultimately require quite a lot of investment in systems and resources that might be costly to members. And from members' perspective as well, I think it would be quite challenging to actually keep a track of their accounts and savings. And we are seeing that in Australia, where members are having a significant amount of unclaimed funds or lost funds, and I believe that will just be, I don't think that will be necessary to achieve that. I do think there is a potential that under certain specific circumstances, that members do be allowed to have their KiwiSaver with two members, and that will probably give some flexibility for providers to implement certain liquidity management tools like suspensions or side pocketing. So, as I said, in specific circumstances potentially, but I don't think it's necessary to have multiple providers and open that.
And there's a singular focus in KiwiSaver on accumulation of your investment and little or no dialogue or assistance, either structural or advisory, about the transition into retirement and decumulation. Nigel, how do you think decumulation should be factored into KiwiSaver?
Well, I definitely think it needs to be part of the conversation. I mean, it's perfectly logical to start with accumulation. You've got to build the assets before you can manage it. But equally, it doesn't make sense to build a nest egg of assets and then, not give people the tools, information and assistance to manage those to have a dignified retirement. So I definitely think it needs to be part of the conversation. And I think there are a number of elements to that. I mean, I think advice comes into it. I think financial literacy comes into it, all the good usual things. There are also important elements of accumulation as well. I think there's also an opportunity around the assets, the products that people can invest in retirement. Annuities is a common theme in these sort of conferences, and it feels like there does need to be investment options that provide certainty for people and makes it relatively easier for them to manage their income in retirement. So, I can see the customer need there. Unfortunately, at the moment, I don't think the tax settings are there, and I think there are some impediments to the annuity market really moving forward in New Zealand at the moment. But I definitely think decumulation needs to be part of the conversation. We need to look at the system holistically and make sure it's working for people delivering the outcomes, not just preparing them for that phase of their life.
And what about the link to New Zealand superannuation? That there's often talk about whether KiwiSaver should be linked in some way to New Zealand super, how that might work. Can be obviously a very political question as well. Should we be contemplating New Zealand super having been complemented by KiwiSaver? Should we be eventually reducing reliance on New Zealand super, possibly having an income test? Anna, what are your thoughts on linking KiwiSaver and New Zealand superannuation?
I think, obviously, they're both linked anyway because they've got the same objective, which is people's retirement and what we talk about as a dignified retirement. Matt Winneray, if you were here last night, talked about the 3 levels that you have to support, and that's 1 and 3 that we have here in New Zealand. It doesn't really give you a 3-legged stool per se, so it's a fine balancing act, but I think they have to work together. And if we think our objective is the end game of a dignified retirement, then you either think that New Zealand super is going to be less relevant because at some point in time, how does the population grow and whether we'll run out, and will that be enough? And we know that at the rates that everyone is contributing to at the moment in KiwiSaver, that's not enough by itself either. So I think you have to look at how you use both those levers together and what that does for you to achieve that end objective. Neither one by itself or acting in isolation is going to cut it.
And another idea that has been discussed is enabling investment into private assets. There's currently no outright legal prohibition on KiwiSaver investment into private assets. However, there are features of KiwiSaver in its current legal and regulatory environment which are disincentives for that. And I think the relative lack of investment by KiwiSaver providers in private assets at the moment means that consumers are not being fully given the opportunity to participate in that part of the market in New Zealand. Harry, do you see KiwiSaver having a role in supporting the growth of New Zealand's capital markets, including investments into private equity, where members want that? Obviously noting it's members' money and managers have a duty to invest that in the best interest of members, and it needs to be their choice.
Yeah, I think as KiwiSaver grows, I think there's definitely opportunity for KiwiSaver and for managers to funds to be invested and support the growth of New Zealand capital markets. I think you're right. Ultimately, it needs to provide good outcomes and returns for the members, right? And it's if that does, then I think there is opportunity. Putting my supervisor hat on, I think it's important to understand the risks as well. And we just look across to Australia, what's happening there and what APRA are doing in terms of deep dive into the investment in private equity. I think it's quite important that managers or providers that do seek investment in those have the necessary skills, processes, controls, governance around that. I think you touched on about some of the distractors that have been in place, and that's obviously liquidity, and given that KiwiSaver is portable, but also important aspect is valuation, understanding how to value those assets. You might not have a huge amount of your portfolio invested in, but unless you can value that properly to ensure it's fair, equitable to all investors who are coming in and out, I think you can run in trouble as well. And then it comes to that point that I mentioned before. It's there might be a need where you provide necessary liquidity tools to managers and providers, which might need some tweaks to legislation, so you can suspend or provide those side pocketing that have been utilised during the GFC and have worked very well. So, if you have those aspects and if you combine that with some of the and address that portability and liquidity issue, I think you could manage those risks, and ultimately it comes down to providers' skills and processes and controls and governance around those. I do think there's opportunity as the KiwiSaver grows to support the growth of capital markets, but ultimately has to benefit the members as well.
And I think that plays into that tweaking versus the full-scale review, but also the short-term versus the long-term objectives. And I think you're going to find it hard to find anyone who disagrees that there is a place for private assets and alternative investments within the structure, because you look at Australia and we talk about the benefit that it would have to NZ Inc. as well as the actual end investors on your long-term investment horizon. The question is then how you phase it in, and I think that's what Harry was talking about. And also it comes back to, unfortunately, financial literacy and education and people understanding. You know, my previous role worked at a financial advisory, and that's high net worth individuals, and some of those people can afford to lose more than on the fringe that we're talking about for our mass KiwiSaver market, and yet that understanding of what's at risk and what the return is and what I'm putting in my long-term bucket versus my short and what are my liquidity and exit options, that's on a one-on-one conversation with an advisor they trust, and that takes a while to get across. So to think that we're instantly going to roll that into our mass market KiwiSaver market and think that'll be fine, it won't, but we absolutely should have plans of how we make that happen, because we know that's where we want to get to. We want better diversification in our investment. We want it back into New Zealand, and we want to use that to improve everyone's outcomes.
Nigel, Sonya, do you have any further thoughts on that?
No, look, I agree completely with what Anna's just said, actually. I think, we all support the direction of travel, we all want to grow New Zealand, and obviously it's got to stack up from a member standpoint. And I think that, helping members to make good decisions to support their retirement outcomes is critical. And I think, it's not a switch you can flick quickly. It's got to be a long-term game. And the last comment I'd make is just, we need to keep the size of KiwiSaver in perspective compared to Australia. $100 billion, it sounds a big number, but there are super schemes in Australia, managing more assets than that, and, in an individual scheme. They have the capability, they, have the skills and infrastructure and all of the capability that you need to do that successfully. So I think it's a great idea, but it will take time.
Yeah, and probably I would add around, I guess at the heart of why we created KiwiSaver, to us is, our whole mission is to create financial empowerment, and some of the threads that we pull around that are around having the choice, having choice, and then having confidence and control around your money. And we have seen real major shifts in creating those experiences through software, through technology, and being able to deliver that at mass. So I think, although we can say, and I don't think, I think there's room for all. I think you can really raise, yes, we want to give people choice, so I think definitely want to make more things accessible to people, especially because their retirement, their journey is going to be unique, and what people want from their retirement is going to be completely unique, and the path to get there can be too. And so by giving people the choice to be able to invest however they like and in the things that they like, it feels is very important to us and one of our core things. And then, also around probably really confident in how much you can lift people's engagement through not necessarily just the one-to-one conversations, but do think that they play a role as well, and a really big role.
Yeah, and related to that, I guess, is purpose ownership and stewardship, and that can be very important for some investors in particular. So, responsibly managing and allocating capital is important for value creation for the economy, but for environment and society. Nigel, how do you see stewardship or purpose ownership having a role in KiwiSaver, again, for those investors who want that?
There's a bit in there, isn't there? Look, I think it's actually well aligned with KiwiSaver. I think stewardship is about, active ownership. It's designed to create and support long-term value, and I think that's a really good fit with KiwiSaver, which fundamentally is a long-term investment. I think, and the way you do that is through, day-to-day stewardship. It's about holding your investee companies to account on matters relating to, ESG, effectively. And I think, there's a public good for that. And as I say, I think it should create and hold, and build value over time. Your point about, for investors who want that, I think that's a really good point. There's obviously a whole lot of badge products out there which people can opt into. Increasingly, the market has matured as well. I think it started with exclusions, pretty much, negative screening. so people weren't investing in cluster bombs, and that, those sort of really antisocial, type securities. But I think now it is maturing. There's a far greater focus on, more sustainable investment type approaches across the market. There's more choice for customers, and I think that's great. And I think it is, the long-term piece, I think it is a really good fit with KiwiSaver.
I think that flows back into what we've talked around about personalisation and choice, because just because what I believe in and I want to exclude or are willing to invest in doesn't mean that's going to match with Nigel or anyone else's. And so as that market matures and as the KiwiSaver schemes mature, I think we're able, and scale comes into it, to offer more choices for people. And the more personalised it feels, the more engaged you are, and therefore the more you're willing to invest in the journey and to get engaged in setting yourself up for retirement. So I do think we have a duty to think about not just what it means in terms of the protection of the KiwiSaver scheme and are we doing right as a structure for our country, but also how do we make that a personal journey for everyone so that they feel it's relatable to them in their own retirement journey.
And as providers, are you seeing that demand now from your customers? Are you getting that feedback and seeing that engagement?
Yeah, we are, and I'm sure we're all the same, that certain topical, and the media has a lot of that to do with it, certain topical things come up and then we instantly will get those questions from our members, or what does that mean for me, and where do I go to find that information? And so that's a good thing because it sparked a level of interest, but it also speaks to, in terms of what is good information to have, where do people go looking for reliable information, and how do you sort I think we've talked about before, right, the TikTok information versus the news or any other kind of fact-based. So yeah, we do absolutely get questions.
And same for you, Nigel, Sonya, you're getting the same sort of feedback?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's issues pop up with increasing regularity, and it's interesting because it's subjective, and that's the point, so it's one of the challenges for providers, You can't just react to the moment. You've got to make good decisions about, the settings for your fund and for your customers.
Great. And speaking of questions popping up with increasing regularity, I'm starting to get a few coming through on my system next to me here. So if you do have any questions, I'd love to see them coming through, and I'll put them to the panel shortly. We've talked about a lot of ideas today for reform, and some of them have very political elements to them, and I know we've heard from the Minister earlier today as well. Some are also more palatable than others to implement in different parts of the economic cycle. Anna, what are your thoughts on managing KiwiSaver reform throughout different government cycles and different economic cycles?
So I liken this a little bit to, I've been a CEO at Smartshares for coming up a year. In fact, this is my first anniversary of, I came to the awards dinner a year ago when I'd been announced but hadn't yet started, so it's completed the circle for me today. And so in terms of that, though, I think what I have learned on this journey this year is the clarity of the vision and the objectives, and part of that and taking everyone along that journey is them understanding what we're trying to achieve and what we want to get out of that. And then you figure out how you do it on the way. And so my suggestion would be that with our split ownership of KiwiSaver at the moment, with no direct minister in charge, that complicates it for us because there's not a single unified vision. There's not an end game that we're all heading towards that can help. So as an industry, absolutely, we've been encouraged by the government to make sure that we're getting a common and consistent message, that we're putting the ball on the tee so they can hit that. We need to talk to the employers and everyone else, and that's a great thing to do. But I think that it will really help if there was actually a champion of KiwiSaver who is keeping in mind what that vision is and can hold that through whatever government is in place and whatever economic cycle. Because for us to make change, the tweaking or the full-scale review, unless you know your end destination and where you're heading, it's very hard to execute a plan.
Yeah, look, absolutely. So questions coming through from the audience here. Number one in, what does the panel think should be the first and ideally the fastest and easiest reform to KiwiSaver? I'm just going to throw these questions out there and open them up, and you can jump in as you wish, panellists, and respond to these.
Contributions.
Nothing like going for the easy stuff first, Harry? Total REM would be one. Yep. At the moment, employers can offer employees total REM packages, which include KiwiSaver, and it's really not very consistent with the intent of the legislation. I think there's a real opportunity to, it's a relatively small fix, but I think would have a big impact for a whole lot of New Zealanders, and people would be a lot better off as a result. They'd not only get the contributions from their employers, they get the government contributions, you get the investment gains. I think the long-term outcomes would be really positive.
Eligibility. And I think when we talk around, for everybody and the inequalities of that, then making some changes to eligibility, making sure that people, when they take a break in their employment or not, or that an employer is contributing for everybody, even if the employee is not contributing. So that consistency of constant eligibility, I think that's achievable.
Yeah, I think, a lot goes into, we've already talked about how many parties are involved in KiwiSaver and people and employers and policy and all the things. So it's quite hard on the spot to just go what would be the quickest, but and the easiest, because I hope everyone's looking at all the pieces. But definitely I think the total REM one popped up to me is my first thought.
And what about the use of KiwiSaver for first home purchase? Do you think there's scope to refine or reform that area of KiwiSaver?
I can see you looking at me. And look, I wasn't a big fan of this back in the day, but I've come to it now. I think it really gets people into the savings habit. And I think people, home ownership's a really positive thing for individual Kiwis as well. And I think this is a great way of helping that. The engagement that people get saving for their first home starts a lot earlier. They're motivated. It gets them, into the economic. It gets them an economic interest, for want of a better term. And so, I think it's definitely a good thing. The challenge we've got is houses get more expensive. People get into them later, and it's more of a challenge to pay them off. But I think that savings habit, getting that established, is really critical, and it has huge cut through with young people.
Yeah, it's very rare to hear, when you ask people what they're saving for or things like that. It's very hard to, not often is the answer retirement, unless you're kind of getting older. So I think, what it had, I don't know how many times I've said the word engage or engagement, but at the heart of engagement is, I think it has really played a role in getting more people engaged in an earlier age and really seeing the value while it isn't compulsory. And it does make up a piece of your retirement picture to own your own home and all of that. So I know it's been a lot of celebratory moments where people use it to buy their first home, but I also understand the broader impacts.
And I think the thing is, once they've used it to buy that first home, if that's what they're doing, then you still need to keep contributing to retirement, because your home ownership is not a retirement plan in itself. And in fact, quite often you'll find that asset that you've built up isn't helpful for an income or that type of contribution to your retirement. So it absolutely helps with engagement, I agree. It's then after that knowing its position in your portfolio, as it were, and what else you need to be doing to broaden out your retirement.
I do wonder about it as well, if you, while we're thinking really long term, just around the role of property and people wanting to own property and how that's playing out as well, because I think that matters now, and it has mattered because people do still really believe in that property dream, and it is more than just an investment. It is like a place to live. It's a lot about your life, but that is changing, and there will be a lot of people in Aotearoa, as there is around the world, who may not look to own their own home in their lifetime for a number of reasons, and one of those being choice as well as accessibility. But maybe that won't factor in as much. So what's that medium term look like at that point?
What are your views on compulsion?
Okay, well, I kind of go back to being a parent and my children. And so I think that compulsion is an important tool in setting up a framework, because until people know that they need to do something, then they don't get to that level of engagement and it doesn't feel real to them. And so I think you'd like to think, as with my kids, that you give them choices and they make the right choice every time. But part of that is setting down where the boundaries are and what's important, and then they learn to make their own choices in the framework. And so I think in big long-term objectives, if we want to get to that point, I think compulsion is a good tool that we should be using to make sure that we're getting that level of engagement and people being personally invested, and then you can refine from there.
Other contributions from the panel on compulsion?
Yeah, I think the Retirement Commission has done a bit of a research into that, and I agree kind of long term. I think it's also quite good to understand that level of not-contributing members as well, and why they're not contributing, whether that compulsion would add to that, and because we still have a number of members that are in KiwiSaver that are not contributing, and I guess on the other side, we also as supervisors, we do see financial hardships, and we do see what comes through those, obviously, with providers, and you do look at some of those members, and you do realise that they can't afford a lot, and they do require that access. So I guess from my perspective, I agree with Anna in terms of long term, but I would like to understand a bit more that interplay of compulsion effect on not contributing members, and how would that impact some of the members who are.
You could do it on a
struggling as well.
staged basis, right, where you're talking about contribution levels as well, and so you can flag that and build it in as well. You don't have to turn it on overnight.
Yeah, and a related question that's come in there is, do you think Kiwis are on board with an increase to minimum contribution rates? Are politicians thinking it could be damaging to them to implement any changes to minimum contributions?
Look, for me, this is where I touched on it before. I think using employer contributions to raise contribution levels generally is a better way to go. I think there are real challenges around affordability for so many Kiwis at the moment, and obviously employer-led would be passing that on to employers, and their capacity to do that will obviously vary. That's where I think it's so important to, clearly signal change well in advance and implement it gradually. To compulsion, my previous view was always, if you can achieve it any other way, you wouldn't do it. It should be a last resort. I think we've learned a lot with KiwiSaver over 17 years. I think we're not solving the problems at the moment. We need to look at the settings, we need to have a look at the long term, and I think that Australian type model, employer-led contributions to increase the contribution level, compulsion should be considered as part of that process.
You've talked about employer-led. We've had a question from the floor for the employers on the panel. Do you walk the talk? Do you pay more than 3%? And individually, do you contribute more than 3%? If not, why not? Now, feel free not to answer that if you don't want to.
Well, look, I can, I work for a bank. We've got a generous scheme, and they generously contribute more than 3%, which is great. And, I guess that's one of the real advantages of working for an Australian bank. The superannuation arrangements are consistent with what happens in Australia, so it's a real benefit. And
we contribute 4% if you for a team benefit, and as well we'll match for paid parental leave. Like we'll put we contribute to KiwiSaver on top of the top-ups.
So look, there's been a couple of comments coming in saying, great discussion, we're all enjoying it, which is good to hear. However, this discussion is not new. We've talked about a lot of the same things last year and the year before. How do we actually get some traction? How do we turn the discussion into action?
Listening to Nicola this morning, I think we do have, and someone mentioned yesterday that there was quite a good masterclass session, and I think it came quite well. I think we, as an industry, have a role to play, and what Anna mentioned earlier, there's no one in the government ownership of the KiwiSaver, but we as an industry have a role to play, and I think if we present ourselves that it is for the members, that it's not for our own interest as an industry, I think we need to lead the charge, and I think we need to make sure that we continue to lead the charge there, because it is ultimately benefiting the members and the New Zealand population as well. So I think we just need to continue to plug into that.
Any other thoughts?
I think the vision, like having that clarity of where we're going, because, coming back to the original question of the panel, a tweak or a full-scale, review, I think There's so much that is working around the way that it is, and people are in a fundamentally better situation because it exists, and there's so much about the design of KiwiSaver as it is that I'm definitely in like the tweaks bucket, but I think you've got to make those tweaks in a direction of going somewhere, and it really is understanding that it's not going to be popular because you're talking about taking money from somewhere, whether it's employers, you're making it harder, or more expensive to run your business, whether it's people, you're taking money out of their paycheck every, however often people get paid. It's coming from somewhere, but it's like that vision, putting that towards places. But we know, one of the things that people want most when you actually say, why are you saving or investing? It's because you want comfort and you want to know that you're going to, you've just got what you need to support you throughout your life. And so I think if you can connect it to people and create those engagements and make it really real for people, then I think that's all part of it. So where is this going? How does this help people? And then working out, but knowing that it isn't going to be a popular change. So I can appreciate that.
And I think the fact that we asked the question and realise we've repeated ourselves from previous years is a good self-realisation. And so particularly from an FSC point of view, with the KiwiSaver policy settings that have come out, the Retirement Commissioner is doing more data and pushing for that to be as part of the income policies review. It does feel like there's some things lining up in terms of timing. The government have talked about doing a KiwiSaver review. I think they probably need a bit more help to make that happen. And that's when I go back to the analogy again, right? Our job collectively is to not be talking about it anymore, to be actually put the ball on the tee and hand them the club. And so as much as we can do to set that up, I think that's our greatest chance of success. And there's definitely a momentum of feeling that that's our job to do that now, not just have opinions and have discussions and make recommendations. We need to tee up the ball.
I agree with that. I think the other thing too is linking that to the benefits to New Zealand Inc. I think that's really important, and the challenges of an ageing population. Because I think there's some real challenges for government to solve in the longer term, and I think the KiwiSaver settings are part of the solution to that.
Yeah, I had a comment in here actually about the session this morning from the Minister, noting the contributions tax on superannuation is high in New Zealand, which creates a huge disincentive to contribute more to super, which in turn leads to higher reliance on the government pension coffers. Do you think there's appetite to lobby the government on this ultimate downside to government funds? The person has commented here that the Minister this morning referred to not wanting to gouge people's wallets. Is she more focused on their current spending power to stimulate the economy? Any thoughts or comments on that one?
I'm not going to delve into the Minister's thoughts, but I think in terms of are there tax incentives that could be made, and if you look again across at Australia, there is definitely different structure in way they tax money in, your earnings in your superannuation scheme, so KiwiSaver, and on the way out. And there are definitely things that we can put into that plan which I think there should be appetite for, and that are workable within a wallet if you think that you're trying to work within that envelope.
We've had a couple of questions in here around early withdrawals. Do you think we should be changing the criteria for hardship withdrawals? One person has commented here that the conception is that it's a savings account, that it's my money, just give it to me. Does the narrative need to change? Equally, there's similar comments here that in the recent economic downturn, we've seen KiwiSaver being used as a buffer to cushion members against higher interest rates, and this may have potentially disguised the extent of the impact of high interest rates on households. Do you think that early access to KiwiSaver should be abolished so that it serves its purpose of being for retirement savings? Sorry, a lot on that. I'm asking any. Yeah.
He's the supervisor.
Yeah. Look, in terms of the first question around hardships, withdrawals, the process and what we are seeing, I think the process works well. I think it's that perception of its savings account, it comes, but I think to go through that process, it's not an easy process, and I think there's quite a good settings that the Corporate Trustee Association, which is all supervisor follow and guidelines, and I think it's it wouldn't be the approach that all supervisors takes, it's similar, and it's a robust process. So my view is, from our perspective, it's what we actually see. It is hardships, and to meet the threshold, it does require a level of proof that person can't really meet the ends meets, and they do need that money. So I think with the increase in KiwiSaver, with the increase in hardships, what we have historically seen is there was an event, whether there was a loss of job or divorce or something. Now is genuinely people just cannot meet the minimum living requirements, and and that threshold for them to meet, it's not easy.
So it's more day-to-day hardship you're seeing rather than
exactly.
a crisis or an event. And I think we've certainly heard anecdotally that there's been an increase in hardship withdrawal requests. What have you seen in your business? What sort of proportion have you seen in recent times?
Well, they're doubled.
More than double?
Yeah, I think
wow.
I think the supervisor across the industry, they've doubled compared to last year.
Gosh.
And I think that there are a number of companies, right, the range of advice and the number of companies who are helping in there. Some of this in the BAU that we're seeing as well is actually around financial mentoring or debt mentoring, actually. And so rather than a black and white, do you qualify or not, and what's your situation, the threshold is high, and these are people who are in need. It's also what can we do to help partner to wrap around a bigger service, to look at what else is going on in your life, what other debt do you have going on, how might we help you restructure some of that to get you into a better footing. And that comes back to that financial understanding and making choices. And so as a KiwiSaver, you get your withdrawal in your yes or a no, right, in consultation with the supervisor, but there's actually a bigger, broader picture that we need to try as a broader financial community to wrap around to make sure that we're helping people, because it's not just a black swan event, and a number of times it's actually how am I structuring and living my life, and how am I spending my money.
Yeah, I think you're right, because that withdrawal and whatever it is, it's only paid for a certain period of time, right? And you have to resolve. It's a much broader issue than that minimum requirement.
Do you think having a savings sidecar addition to KiwiSaver would be helpful in limiting hardship withdrawals?
It might be. It could be, but when I think about when Harry mentioned those, and some of the people are saying, well, that's my money and I need it. If you had a savings sidecar, well, that would already be empty. And then I'm still having that discussion. So, yes, if used in the right way, but then it comes back to what's the purpose and what are your goals and what are you trying to achieve and where's the discipline of spending money. And at risk of repeating myself from something earlier this morning, I think that if you think about in your entire lifetime, you are going to spend every dollar that you earn. And that might be in the fact you want to give it to the next generation, but it's still all going to be gone. So it's really a question of what are you spending it on and when. And that's the same as it comes into having your different accounts that you're saving in, and one's longer term and one's accessible, etc. It's a great idea if it sits alongside, but really it's the use of it that makes the change, not it being available.
Yeah, and you have to exhaust all your savings to meet the hardship requirements anyway, right? So
that would be the first cab of the sidecar rank.
Yeah. I mean, it's rational behaviour what people are doing, aren't they? They don't have other options. It's their money. There is, there's a reasonably rigorous process they need to go through to get it. So, yeah, I mean, it feels like the current settings are okay at the moment, and I don't think a sidecar would change that significantly, to Anna's point.
And there's different tools for the job, and because there are savings accounts. Did I just get cut off? So it's about really working on how do you engage people in their wealth. I think you mentioned it, Anna, around the broader picture. It's how do you build up those buffers or the savings accounts. And the beauty in the KiwiSaver is around the simplicity of it too. So I think it's really looking at that and working out whether that's the design of it is for that or whether it is for that longer term.
Yes, how you make it easy for people, right, and to get the engagement and all the other points we've been discussing. I've got a couple of other questions here. Conscious we've got about 6 minutes left, so if there are any further questions, please get them into me now so I can get them to our panellists. Nigel and Anna, this question is directed at you. Do your KiwiSaver funds currently have exposure to New Zealand private assets? If not, what is the number one barrier that needs to be removed to enable that investment?
Yeah, no, look, I'll go first here. Look, we don't. And look, there are a range of obstacles to that. So at the moment, I think the opportunity set for New Zealand private assets is reasonably limited. We don't have the management capability in-house. We could buy the management capability externally, but I think the cost of doing that relative to the fees that we charge doesn't make it a particularly commercial proposition. So, again, we absolutely support the government's intent in trying to grow New Zealand, invest in New Zealand's infrastructure. But I think it's a more nuanced issue than just saying we want to do it at the moment.
And for us, under the Super Life KiwiSaver, we are market tracking KiwiSaver funds, and so those are low fees with the market tracking product underpinning all of that. And so no, we don't have private assets in that because that's not one of the core standard asset allocation building blocks for that. We're also actively involved in that discussion about how that might work and what that would look like, but we also want to stay true to that value proposition and how do we make that be in affordable fashion, because this is part of our conversation about do you just drive fees to the bottom or do you talk around value for money, and the benefit of private assets and the asset allocation to that is that it does come with an additional cost and expertise, and therefore it cannot be at the lowest fee range. And so how do you tell that story and know what your value proposition and why people are choosing and having some choice in what they can be invested in?
It's a lovely segue into the final question I've got here about choice, and we just spoke about making things easy. The question is, choice sounds a lot like product proliferation, which is much of the industry is trying to unwind. Do you see more complexity flying in the face of simplicity and consumers actually being able to make a choice when there are too many options?
I think there's a whole lot of data out there to suggest that having too much choice is unhelpful. But equally, I think the KiwiSaver market, there are 30-something providers. There's, it's a highly competitive market. It's easy to switch. You think about Nicola Willis's comments earlier. That's a sort of healthy competitive market I think, government wants, and I think New Zealanders want. So I think choice is a good thing. Having lots of choice isn't necessarily easy, but I still think, part of that's about the way providers engage with people. That's a challenge for individual providers, really.
I think there's providing the choice, and then also, so making things accessible is one element of it, but then it's also supporting people to make that choice, the choice that's right for them, which is equally part of it. So I think I'd be very off-brand if I said I wasn't into people having choices, and that you can create a really safe environment for that.
Excellent. Look, thank you everyone for those wonderful comments that you've shared with us today, and thank you all for coming along today. I do hope you found this session interesting and informative, and that you'll all be inspired to contribute to progressing KiwiSaver reform in New Zealand and further development of KiwiSaver. Before I hand back to Rochelle, please join me in thanking our panellists in the usual way.